Next up, I'm really delighted to be able to welcome 4 superb fellow Brits onto the stage who own, invest, or lead a number of our greatest entrepreneurial brands. This session was developed really off the back of a principle of Luke Johnson, who's a well-known investor in the UK. He believed that there's 2 pinch points when it comes to growing a brand, a hospitality brand. That's 7 and 17 sites. And under that basis, when we sat at the advisory group, I felt that we really needed to look at the growth pains, and that's what we're going to do today, is talk a little bit about early stage growth, geographic expansion, buying new companies, getting ready for that next stage, whether you should give away equity and at what stage, and when to bring in advisors. So with no further delay, I'm really delighted to invite Simon Potts, who's Managing Director of the Alchemist, who are a 13-site bar and restaurant concept across the UK, who specialise in theatre serves. Richard Morris, who's Chief Executive Officer of Tortilla, who have got 35 units in the UK and 4 here in the Middle East, who's got a very long background of working in large casual dining operations. Then Jillian MacLean, who's the founder and CEO of Drake & Morgan, who roll out unique spaces with crafted cocktails and inspired menus under multiple formats. Turning 10 years this year, they have 23 sites, and she's very, very honoured to receive an MBE for services to hospitality. And then last off, we've got Paul Campbell of Hill Capital Partners, who's invested in and is a non-exec chairman and director of several fast-growing businesses. I'm going to get it right this year. Hawksmoor, Tortilla, The Alchemist, Gusto, and Hickories, amongst many others. So if we can get a big round of applause for my panel, please. Welcome, everybody. And one of the things I'm really, really keen to do is make sure that it doesn't just feel opinion-based. It's very much around the facts of those kind of pinch points for each of you. So we've had a number of discussions beforehand. And on that basis, I think we'll start off very quickly. So it strikes me that getting to know your own weaknesses and strengths as a leader is really important, and understanding where those pain points may come and the advisory support that you need around you. On that basis, Paul, given that you're someone that works with many early stage concepts, at what point do you think you need to be bringing in external advisors to a business?
I would say the most important thing early is to bring in people who've done it before. You just heard from Robin, you know, there's quite a journey in growing any restaurant brand and bar brand, and these guys have all done it brilliantly. If you're doing it for the first time, it's like anything, it's much harder. So I don't think it's necessarily advisors. Apology to any advisors in the room. I think you can park the advisors until later. I would recommend you get somebody who's actually grown a business before, and they can give you kind of practical advice. So you know, what I tend to do is invest early. I'll go on the board as a chairman or a non-exec, and a bit of a mentor to the teams, particularly if they're doing it for the first time.
Okay, that's great. And in terms of those very early stages, what first pain points do you tend to see that you need support with?
Well, it's quite important that the first couple of restaurants are profitable. It's quite hard to build a business if your first restaurants, you can afford to get number 5 wrong or number 6 wrong. It's not ideal. But if you get number 1, 2, or 3 wrong, you're making life very hard for yourself. I think Luke's 1770 thing is true, and we'll discuss that, but I think there's also a big point about going beyond the first site. Even the second site, you can man mark or woman mark 1 or 2 restaurants or bars. Once you get to 3, you've got to start investing in other people, and you've got to have the confidence to bring in operational support and other people, and that probably means your profits might even go flat or backwards for a couple of years, but you've got to kind of invest for the future.
And do you think it takes a certain kind of person to make that jump, or do you think it's something that you can kind of train and support with no matter who that is?
I think it is a certain type of person, and it's not right for everybody. I often meet people who've got brilliant single-site restaurant businesses, and I push them quite hard on why they want to grow, because it's not for everybody. I mean, you can have a fabulous single site that throws off plenty of cash, and it can give you a brilliant business. Scaling up is not for everybody. You've got to have the ambition, you've got to have the vision, you've got to have the energy, you've got to have the intelligence. I mean, it's a real kind of sort of person that I'm looking for, who I think is going to make the transition into a much bigger business.
That's great. If we rewind 10 years then, Jillian, and you're starting out, you had quite a unique situation in the respect of how you were founded and the support you had. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. We started in January of 2008, which was probably kind of quite a strange time in the UK, a bit like now actually. And our kind of founding fathers and mothers really were kind of EIS investment, and actually I was working with partners and suppliers and people converting their kind of spend into the business to become shareholders as well, really. So it was a difficult time probably to raise money actually, certainly to get any lending in place from banks, but actually we started life as EIS and then we went on to sell the business and refinance the business a few years ago. But I think the key thing that we found was not to dilute actually, so that you, to Paul's point, actually keep the business really focused, and actually so that you're not off trying to raise money all the time and get distracted by that and then come back and look at the business and it be in difficult shape. So we were fortunate with Mbiba and the guys there that have backed many other EIS investments as well to have a great start and kind of have good clarity and mentoring and support, as Paul says as well, which was super.
And what was your first significant hire within the business?
Honestly, a free one, my mum. Yeah, my mum worked with me right in the beginning, actually, which reminds me of today still, really. But I would say, really, our FD, really, we had a part-time FD with us for a period of time. And actually, we also worked closely with them. We had a really small creative team, and they were outsourced, some based in San Francisco, in Spain and other different parts, actually helping us on creativity and innovation. Because I suppose for all of us, when you get in a business, you get busy on the doing rather than the thinking about where the business should go, really. So having a good FD and partner alongside, actually, even though that was a part-time role for many years, was really supportive as well as the creativity and the innovation, because those guys were able to travel and help evolve and influence our offer, really.
I think the creative thing is really, really imperative and quite often forgotten. Actually, from past to you, Simon, I think it's one of the things that really strikes me within your business, being the Alchemist, that every aspect of it seems to be really amazingly creative and, I suppose, curated in an amazing way. Do you want to talk a little bit to that?
Yeah, I think obviously I came to the business after it had been established really by the parent group at Living Ventures. So there was already an operational team, there was a certain amount of system and structure in place. It meant that I got to come in and take a bit more of a holistic kind of overview of the business and look at what we had to achieve. I came in at the point of investment, so clearly there was an expansion program that was going to be followed. You do that obviously through acquiring sites and the usual format, but actually it was quite important to establish the brand of the Alchemist in people's hearts and minds. It had always been very, very strong visually, very creative, very interesting in terms of the imagery around it and some of the stories that we've sort of some created and some adopted. And it's finding them platforms to be able to get that message out. And a lot of that is about, taking the time or having a good established operations team, which allows you the time to get out into the big wide world, talk to the media, go to those networking events, take the time to actually spread the story of your business. If you're in that private equity arena, then clearly you're going to be watched and observed by the investment community, and they want to understand the people that sit behind the business. And sometimes you can do that through the storytelling that you do around the brand.
And I think one of the things that really impressed me when we chatted before this was that your structure around operations, and that you've broken it down into actually we're fundamentally a bar concept, a restaurant concept, and we've got a kitchen all within the same building, and you've kept that quite separate. Do you want to talk a little bit about that philosophy?
Yeah, I think that the business was born out of its sort of cocktail heritage. That was what and still remains the most important part of the brand. Every site that we designed, the theatre of the bar is the fundamental essence of the space. So it's always the first thing you see when you walk through the door. It was a bit. We were helped out by the fact that the space became available to us at our original site. So rather than just having a little bolt-on kitchen, which was almost an afterthought, all of a sudden we had this room to push into at the time when casual dining was really starting to take hold. People were looking for interesting offers, maybe a little bit different to what was on the high street. So we've really grown up that restaurant business in the last few years. And again, that's part of that brand narrative is make sure that message is understood by people. The go-to thing with the brand is to see the smoking cocktails and the theatre from the bar. But actually there's a really powerful restaurant business that sits behind that as well. It makes it very profitable to run the two things out of the same space.
That's great. If we pass to you now, Richard. You've got the most expansive estate of everybody here. If you think back to, I know that you joined and took over from the founding CEO. What were the key issues at that point, and what did you have to do to try and overcome at that step of growth?
It's interesting when you take over a business. I think there were 9 or 10 locations when I took it over, and having in a previous life been part of an original management team at starting a business that we grew to a certain level, it was interesting to come in after the first stage. Now, it was pretty clear that I was keen to get involved in this business because it was very successful, even in the very early stages. And Paul mentions how important it is to get the first few sites up and running and being very successful. It's hugely important because you get all the motivation and enthusiasm behind your backers, all the people involved. There's a huge kind of motivation behind succeeding, and you haven't failed yet. So clearly there was only one way I could go, which was to find something that would fail. And it didn't take me too long, but we've done pretty well. But one of the most important things is that when you start a business, as I spoke to Brandon about, who was the founder, you have a team of people who have a tremendous skill at launching a new business. They all work very closely together. They're all very close. They're kind of mates because you're all thrown in it. You're all doing different jobs. It's literally just get them open and then get them as successful as possible, which he had achieved. But he'd achieved it through his own blood, sweat and tears and working 100 hours a week and basically making sure that every aspect of the business was great. He reached a point where he realized that actually the business needed to go to another level, and with all due respect to Brandon, he wasn't a restaurateur. He realized he was sitting on something that was pretty huge, but said, I'm killing myself here. I need somebody who's been there and done that. We got on extremely well. It was a great business. But very early on, you then have to sit back and say, okay, we're now at 10 sites. To get to 20, to 30, to 40, there are certain skills that are required within a management team that the existing people may well not have. And then it becomes quite challenging. You want to make sure that the guys are still engaged, but you also have to be sure that can they take this to the next level, because it's a very different skill set. The business needs foundations, it needs manuals, it needs training programs, it needs structure and organization. And at that stage, it didn't have too much of that. So it's not the most exciting part of a business. You are having to put all this kind of dull, boring structure in. And a few people put their hands up and said, we understand this is what's needed, but I'm out. And that was okay. And then, as Paul has already said, you bring in people who have done this before and who know what it takes to grow a business. So that's basically what I did.
It's quite interesting, actually, because I was invested in Tortilla before Richard came involved. And Brandon, the founder who Richard mentioned there, very unusual, because often founders don't see that requirement, or they have to be persuaded that they need to kind of reinforce management. Brandon completely got it. I mean, he's Californian. Maybe it's something to do with the kind of mentality of building businesses there. He absolutely got the fact that there was a founding phase, and then there was a professionalization phase. And Richard then, has led the business brilliantly since then.
And I mean, Brandon's fantastic, such a great guy. And I'm just wondering, how do you, and one for both of you, I suppose, who have been involved in this brand, moving forward from that point, how do you make sure that you kind of keep that sense of the DNA and what it is that makes that brand special?
I think it's important to say at this particular stage that the private equity guys and the board were none too pleased with Brandon's decision to step away from the business at the time. So there was an initial challenge about, listen, Brandon is still going to be involved to a degree, but actually we do need to move this thing forward. And because of my relationship with some of the board, and I knew them before, they were very supportive about the change, where, you can imagine a lot of people wouldn't have been. So at that stage of growth, we stay very close. Brandon stays on the board. But I knew that we had a product that worked, we had environments that were pretty good, and we had locations that were very successful. We hadn't yet opened a port location, but it was my role to go and get some refinancing and to start scaling this business up relatively quickly. In a fast casual business, you need scale. You need to be able to open locations. So very early on, we looked at where we were operating, why were they successful, where was going to be our key focuses on opening sites. So we put a whole property thing together. We knew exactly the locations we wanted to be. We needed high footfall, we needed tourists, we needed office workers, we needed students. And we plotted our way around the UK, generally quite successfully, although there is no doubt we have a few challenging locations. And we're also dealing with a product that not everybody around the UK is fully aware of, burritos and tacos and quesadillas. And so in certain markets, our business takes a while before it takes off. But then when it does take off, it's incredible. I mean, our numbers are extraordinary. Year 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we're still in double-digit growth in a lot of locations. So it's clearly a business that people love. It's well priced. So property-wise, that was the first thing we did, and then literally it's getting the team right to take it forward.
On the point of brand, Jillian, you sit in quite an interesting space in the respect of you've got a number of venues, you've got a number of kind of front-facing brands that have got some similar propositions, others different. I mean, what was the kind of strategy behind that, and has that caused any pain points in its own right?
Well, I think for us, our kind of model is 85% templated, 15% play. And in our original business plan and journey, when we started out, it was about doing scale, independent neighbourhood bars and restaurants, really. And that's what our first 5 or 7 were, actually. And then as we were going outside of London, we thought we would test the refinery, which is our original site by the Tate Modern, to test that in Edinburgh and in Manchester as well. And we've had great success in terms of going to Edinburgh and tailoring it to local market. Manchester's more challenging in terms of probably there's a lot of capacity there. For us, I know Simon knows the market very well. If your business being born in that era, we've got lots to learn and tailor there. But what we found is we acquired, I don't know if I'm jumping ahead or anything, James, but we acquired Corney & Barrow as a business just less than 2 years ago. And that was a really interesting thing to do, because we thought what we would then do is take the refinery brand and scale that a bit. So we now have a small collection of 6 of those. But we did quite a lot of customer feedback where people still talked about they liked the individuality. We've got a very large database of customers, of which predominantly the majority of the database, about 80% of the database, is women, who are, and our proposition was set up not with a kind of overly feminine approach, but with a female influence in terms of for our sales team and such like. So we did quite a lot of storyboards with a lot of our customers and actually listened to their views, and actually people liked the individuality. So we've gone on to do that, certainly over our last few concepts, and some of the new stuff that we've opened, not just bars and restaurants, but co-working spaces in the deli as well. So we'll probably scale up the refinery as a brand to go outside of London, but actually retain the individuality in London, really. Because that's what customers seem to like. So. And
certainly in the UK, so much of the decision-making around dining and drinking out is made by women that it's increasingly, I mean, there's obviously a huge amount of research that suggests the importance of having strong female leaders on boards, which is really important, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there's 2 girls who co-wrote a book called Inside a Pretty Little Head. And I might have mentioned it elsewhere before. They were both at Ogilvy, and they've written a super book, actually, which really influenced me and our team, really, which talks about, it's not about being an ardent feminist, but it talks about the influence of women influencing about 80% of purchasing decisions. And I think that's key to our proposition and thinking. Actually, what do people want to do? And we've got a 35-40% of our business is pre-booked and prepaid, and we like predictability in our sales line as well as our EBITDA. So the whole point for us is actually listening to those groups of people, and actually listening to our sales team, which is, again, probably about a bit unequal, but 90% women. Yeah, but anyway, it seems to work, yeah. Yeah.
On that point, Simon, if we can look at, Jillian talked about kind of jumping to Edinburgh, which is quite a big jump for her. And within your strategy, I know that you've kind of got a hub type philosophy. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and how that's helping you?
Yeah, I think we were helped by that initially. We had our first 2 sites were out of the city of Manchester, so all of those kind of values you get from being in the city that you're operating in, man-marking the 2 sites, you can walk between the 2 venues. And that, in the early days, was what made us really successful. It meant we had our site-level management teams, there was an operational team overseeing it, there was plenty of presence. So we kind of took that model, and you sort of think, well, that's what made us successful at 2, 3 sites. We'll get to 13, we'll get to 17, we'll get to 25. You're not going to maybe, 1 operator for every 2 venues, but thinking about the country in clusters like that means you can have an operational team overseeing the site managers. So people who understand the essence and the DNA of the business are able to be visible and have a profile in those spaces. And it just helps sort of organically in the growth of things. Some of that it was probably a bit more by accident design early on, but in the nice market that we're in at the moment, where we can be a little bit more considered about where we're going in terms of locations, it means you can plot a geographical path. We're kind of working in reverse to 1 or 2 businesses at the moment, where we're actually coming into London, having come out of the north. It's obviously quite a fertile city to go into. Again, you've got to know the markets within the market of London. But again, having that operational team operating out of the city, as well as the site level management teams, it really gives that confidence, and it helps that message, keeping the DNA strong in the business. And those are themes that we've heard, session after session today, really, just hanging on to your culture.
And that's really, really fantastic. And on that, if we can follow a bit further on, Richard, in terms of the Tortilla model, I know that you said you've got sites in the Middle East. How does that work for you, and what does that look like? Because it's not a huge number in terms of management time and that whole process.
Well, I'm still sharing a table with my franchisees, so I guess the relationship's still pretty good, which is good to hear after some tough conversations earlier on. We have 4 locations out here, hopefully a few more coming up. We're still testing the market to a degree, but things are going pretty well. The food's being well received, the product is well. But for us, predominantly, this is all about making sure the people that have got the rights to roll out Tortilla across the UAE and the Middle East are the right people. At the moment, it's great. So they carry on, they do what they do. We have people coming over, making sure everything's okay. But in principle, my big role, target for the business is to continue to grow throughout the UK. We have a model now that we're rolling out, which is a smaller footprint model. The news around the UK hospitality market is not great. So we're looking at launching smaller models, smaller footprints, smaller capex, lower rents, and so far so good. We've opened one recently that's doing really, really well. We know we're going to do big delivery numbers. That's okay. We're embracing delivery. We're not pushing against it. It's a big part of what we do, so we have to work alongside it, and that model is working for us. So there's plenty of scale for us to do that throughout the rest of the UK, whilst these guys carry on and hopefully grow the brand for us over here.
Thank you. And to end with Paul, question around equity. I know that at a very early stage in a business, it's very common for people to give people who are working with them lots of equity, and you end up with lots of partners. What would your advice be to people in the audience who are maybe at an early stage thinking about just that?
It depends whether they're thinking of giving it to me, I guess. You've got to be very careful. I'd say 2 things, really. One is the people who you think are critical in those first few years may not be the people who are critical 5 years later. Some of them may, but it's unlikely that all of them will. And your kind of founder team, some of them graduate into exactly the sort of people you need to push on to 10, 20, 100 sites. And I have seen situations where people give too much equity away too early, and then what happens 3 years later, they need to bring in a finance person or a property person, and they've got no equity left. Mm-hmm. So you've got to try and anticipate ahead. And again, that's where I think people who've been there before can advise. And the second thing I would say is it's always good to keep your powder dry. So always keep some up your sleeve, because you never know. Somebody might leave. Somebody might surprise you. There might be something that happens in the market where you've suddenly got to bring in a particular bit of expertise. So I would always keep some equity up your sleeve as well.
And I think working with so many brands, if there was 1 or 2 pieces of advice that people would walk away here around the growing pains piece, and what pieces of advice do you think you would give?
I mean, the thing I obsess about more than anything else is avoiding early on avoiding mistakes. And I've seen several very promising companies not graduate to the next stage because they've made often a bad property decision early on. And there's one thing that none of us can change, and that's the rent and the lease. We can change the offer, we can change the people, we can change the marketing, but once you've signed that lease, and in the UK you're signing up to 20, 25-year leases, so it's a massive financial commitment, and I'm often amazed at how casually sometimes people sign up to that. So, I mean, these guys know that's the thing I'd probably obsess about, and also not spending too much money along the way.
Well, I think our time's just about up, but if I can get a big round of applause for my board, for the panel, thank you.
Thank you.